Now, in the information age, a company like LinkedIn or Microsoft or Google or others, lots of others, don't have physical products. At LinkedIn, we didn't have a manufacturing line. We're not selling coal or copper. We had information, which means that by far our most important asset was our people. And so this is where a lot of companies are getting to. It's like, wow, if our people are our most important asset and we don't have enough of them, we don't have enough good ones to do the great work that we need to do, then probably we need to take better care of them.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network, teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, home, and the world at large. You just heard from Scott Shute, a speaker, executive coach, and author of The Full Body Yes, whose goal is to change the way we work from the inside out. He says the most powerful way to build an organization is based in its compassion and mindfulness. But what does mainstreaming mindfulness mean? How can you show compassion for your people and create opportunities for them to focus on their mental well-being? Before Scott answers those questions, he shares his definition of consciousness, and it is so good. Take a listen. So, Scott, I'm really excited to have you on. And just to get to pick your brain, I had a chance to read through a lot of your book, The Full Body Yes, and it is so aligned with the thinking. I think our Conscious Habit listeners are going to love the hell out of you, our conversation, the book. That's a hint. Go buy The Full Body Yes. And I love how you just incorporate everything, Scott, into life. It's not just about work. It's about everything that you do. So can we start off with the name of the show, Conscious Habit? You and I geeked out a little bit about consciousness when we first kind of did our, hey, you want to come on my show kind of talk? Tell me, what the heck does that word mean to you?
Wow. You're going deep fast. All right. I love it.
Fast. We get into it.
So, what is consciousness? Well, what I'll say is first, the only thing I'm an expert in is being me, right? So, I'm not the world's biggest philosopher or have mentalized all these things, but I'm great at being me. So, everything I'm going to tell you is my own opinion. But what is consciousness? I think consciousness is our ability to give and receive love.
Mm.
When I talk about compassion in the workplace, it's a proxy for the word love. And when I talk about love, it's a proxy for the word divine. And when we talk about consciousness, for me, it's our ability to be the divine. So our ability to give and receive love is consciousness.
What a beautiful gift to give ourselves and to other people. And you know what I appreciate is, I don't know if I can use the word mainstream. I don't think that that's a fair analysis, but I do think that these conversations are becoming more common
Mm.
where people are saying, can we talk about love at work? Can we talk about compassion? I mean, for everybody listening, Scott was the head of mindfulness and compassion at LinkedIn, right? And by the way, Scott, I love that you claim that your only expertise is being you. That's an inspiring thing to be. A hell of a lot of people are walking around being who they think everybody else wants them to be. So, even more reason for us to lean into what it is that you have to talk about today. So, I always appreciate like just learning people's journey. And so, to being this human who appreciates love and how you show up in the world and deeply connecting to yourself and the people around you, mindfulness, compassion, all of these wonderful things. How the hell did you get here?
How did that happen? Yeah. Well, I know that you're Indiana. I grew up in Kansas. I grew up on a farm in Kansas, in super rural Kansas, like the kind of rural where it's an hour to the nearest fast food or an hour to the nearest movie theater. And I went to the little family country church, and I always had this deep connection to the divine, whatever you want to call it. Be out on the farm. Now it's like 5,000 acres with my black lab, just kind of running around in nature. And I just felt connected to everything, like the way the light would stream through the trees or the way the water would gurgle in a creek. And so I felt this connection. And for what it's worth, I didn't have that same connection in this whatever we were doing on Sunday. And I had all these questions when I was 10 or 11 that I asked my parents and my pastor, and I didn't like the answers that I was getting. But I found this other thing, this other path when I was 13. My brother had been trying to make a living as a rock star in the world and had come back to run the farm with my dad. And when he described this other belief system, I felt like I had come home. I just started weeping. And it was not like I had been searching for 2 years since I was 11. It's like I was searching for it for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, like two parts of a magnet being separated and then put back together. And I felt like I was home. And part of this practice included a contemplation practice. You could say meditation. I would say technically it's not a meditation, but more of a spiritual exercise. And it's been a big part of my life ever since. I've been teaching classes since I was in college. I'm a member of the clergy. It's a huge part of who I am, but never something I talked about at work until I got to LinkedIn and I was the VP of Global Customer Operations. And I led this team of eventually over 1,000 people. It was a big job, like one of those 24/7 types of jobs. And at LinkedIn, I found it to be so open. Our CEO was talking about his own practice. He was talking about compassion as a leader. And I thought maybe this is a place where I could bring some of my passion, some of this practice to work in a totally secular way, in an inclusive way. And long story short, I got over myself, got over the fear, got over the what are people going to think of me, and led my first session. And there was one guy at that first session, and I'm sure he was just as terrified as I was because I never saw him again. But the next week there were three, and then there were five, and then it was a regular thing. Then people knew that I did it, so I got invited to do bigger things. The CFO would have an offsite with 400 people, invite me to kick it off with a meditation. Well, think about that for a second. Here's this big company, and the finance people are meditating to start their retreat. Like, that's pretty cool. And eventually this snowballed. I volunteered for a few years, but eventually this snowballed into, well, the story is our CEO gave the commencement address at Wharton 4 years ago, very buttoned down, serious Wharton, right? And talked about compassion. It's like if you're going to be successful at work or in life, be compassionate. And I thought, okay, first of all, that's pretty cool. That's pretty brave. He's on TV the next day, and this is all the reporters want to talk about is compassion and leadership. And I was thinking, okay, it's time for real. It's time. It's time for me because I'd been in this operations role for a long time. But it's time for LinkedIn for us to put our money where our mouth is because essentially our CEO just told our, at that time, 12 or 15,000 employees that compassion was the most important thing that they could do. But what were we really doing about it? And I had spent all these years as an operations person. And so I could operationalize it. And so I made a pitch to him, which was very hard to turn down. And we created this role together, head of mindfulness and compassion programs, where my vision is to change work from the inside out by mainstreaming mindfulness and operationalizing compassion. So that's kind of how I got into this work. And then COVID times, I wrote this book, and now I'm out on my own as a free range chicken, doing my own thing.
Back to the farm reference. I like the full circle. I like the full circle, Scott.
Yeah.
It is, as you and I know, and I think probably everyone listening knows, this is so needed and people are leaning into it. I don't think they always know how to bring it to life necessarily for themselves and for their
Mm,
organization. But I appreciate that you were willing to come out of the spirituality closet, if you will, because I think there's a lot of people who are like, I have this thing and it's so deeply personal. And everyone listening, your journey is so deeply personal. There is no one right way. I love how you mentioned it felt like coming home. When you find a practice that allows you to feel like you're in that space, that's how you know that you've connected to what's authentically meant to be for you. The people who aren't there yet are searching for the how do I bring the spirit of who I am to the result I'm driving at work so that it feels like deeper, more meaningful, more connected work. So
yeah.
for people who are feeling that way now, how do you talk to them? What advice do you give? What can they do? What can they lean into?
Oh, there's a fun story I want to tell, but I'll answer the question first, and then maybe we can talk about the story. So, what I say is people ask, can we really be our full self at work? And the truth is, what companies are looking for, what the rest of us are looking for, is be your best self at work. Honestly, there's parts of your life that are probably best to keep at home. And for each one of us, that's a judgment call. Now, the parts of us that light us up, if we use this word consciousness, the parts of us that make us more conscious, whether those are our kids or our grandkids or our hobbies or our spirituality, the part of us that makes us alive, the parts of us that makes us more than we were before, those are the things we want you to bring to work. And so if you have a quilting hobby, right? Okay, nobody wants to hear 3 hours about your quilting hobby. every week. But it'd be great if you shared it in staff meeting every once in a while, show us some pictures, show us what lights you up, and then read the room. Read the room on how people react to that. Because here's the deal. Each of us, one of our most deeply held needs is the need to be seen and heard and acknowledged and gotten. And there's something really powerful about sharing this deepest part of us, this meaningful part of us, in a way that can be consumed and appreciated by other people. You guys all know about the iceberg, right? We talk about ourselves as an iceberg, and what we see about each other is just what's on top. Now, think about the connections you have in your life that are the deepest. Maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your best friend from when you were 6. These are the people that you've lowered the waterline the furthest with, that know some of your history, that know some of the challenges that you've gone through. And when we can share some of that at work and have it be held by other people, it is really powerful. We feel this connection with others. And so, my short advice is like, think about the things that light you up and consider starting to share those a little bit more with your friends at work and your friends not at work.
That takes a deep understanding of self too. If you're listening and you're like, I don't know what that is, well, you now have a homework assignment. And that homework assignment is to lean into your energy of what is it? The time flies by and you're not looking at the clock thinking, oh God, is this over yet? You actually lean into it. You enjoy it. You might laugh a little bit about it. You look forward to it. What are those things? And be more intentional about A, making time for those things, but B, being transparent and sharing those things with the people around you as well. What puts you into that flow state, that's what I think of when you're sharing that, Scott, is what puts you into that. Again, time doesn't exist. I'm being my best self, etc. What they can do to just ensure that they're providing that type of environment for their people.
Simple. You talk about it. So, as an example, at the beginning of staff meeting, and by that I mean a meeting where you already know each other fairly well, like you have the same meeting every week or every other week, instead of just jumping right into the tick list, which dehumanizes us, right? We all come to these meetings perhaps on edge, or we put our shield on because we're playing a certain role. Instead of that, starting the meeting with something, it could be, hey, what's something fun you guys did this weekend? Or what are you grateful for? Or what lights you up? Or anything, just to move from the head to the heart, to get people to light up a little bit. And I love having a series of questions so it's not the same question every time. So for a while, my favorite question is, and these are silly, right? It's like, if you could have any wild animal for a pet and it would do whatever you wanted it to, what would it be? But then the follow up question is, which this is where it gets interesting, is okay, if you had to be a pet for a wild animal and you had to do whatever it wanted, who would you choose? And this is my way of turning these mundane little conversations into something deeper, right? Because at the root of that question is, do you really think humans are at the top of the consciousness food chain? Have you ever considered that we're not? Like, aren't dogs really way more conscious than we are? Like, dogs are always fully present, they're always full of love. I wish I was a dog.
Same, same. I want to be a chocolate lab in my next life. But I love that making work human. We've talked about it on the podcast before. And what I do appreciate is every guest that I've had the just phenomenal chance of talking to, whether it be the leader of a company or a thought leader, no matter where they come from, there is this pattern of make work human, bring love to the work
Yeah.
that you're doing. It starts with you. There's vulnerability, there's authenticity, all of that. It matters. If we are just coming to the table with the idea of you work here, you owe us
Yeah.
now because we pay you, you're slowly killing your people and your profitability.
Yeah, we've gone through this evolution of work, right? If you think about the history of work, you go to the agrarian age, think back to the building of the pyramids, and all the way up into the 1850s. You had kings and slaves, or you had landowners and serfs, or some variation of that. And workers were not treated well. But this is where our management practices come from. I told you to do it, right? But work has moved, it's evolved. We went through the industrial age. Okay, imagine all of us in a factory making the same thing. Still, workers not treated very well or highly valued. But now, in the information age, a company like LinkedIn or Microsoft or Google or others, lots of others, don't have physical products. At LinkedIn, we didn't have a manufacturing line. We're not selling coal or copper. We had information, which means that by far our most important asset was our people. And so this is where a lot of companies are getting to. It's like, wow, if our people are our most important asset, and we don't have enough of them, we don't have enough good ones to do the great work that we need to do, then probably we need to take better care of them. And the stats show this, right? What we know now is that company culture is 14 times a bigger factor than compensation in whether somebody stays or goes. 14 times, right? 9 out of 10 Americans say they would work for less money to have more meaning, more purpose in their work. And so there's this natural transition where this is good ROI, right? Like some people listen to me and at first blush, they're like, oh, really? Like, I don't have time for this. We're trying to make money. I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to help you make money. Like, this is how you win. That's not why I'm in it. It just happens to be a nice side effect. And the most powerful way to build a business is to have compassion at its roots. And there's lots of research that actually bears this out.
I'm fully with you on this. I've been in sales training for over a decade, and we can always see that the companies that do the best aren't the ones who are just out grinding. Those people do well for a while, but then there's a lot of burnout. The people who really have sustainable growth are the ones who are happiest in the roles that they're doing.
That's right.
And then they're also doing the right things, committed to the mission. There's all of that that follows, but they're happy in what they're doing. And so, okay, couple things to break down, and I'm curious to get your take on this. How would people know if they need to lean into this mindfulness, this compassion? What might they be experiencing that sort of those smoke signals to look inward?
Well, I think everyone needs it. So here's the thing, life is the best teacher. And I think the pandemic and COVID and all the stuff we experienced, on the one perspective, has been an incredible gift. Now, stick with me because a lot of people like, okay, maybe it wasn't physically a gift or financially or emotionally or blah. From a consciousness perspective, it was a gift.
Hmm.
Because in the middle of all that mess, when I would ask people what's most important to them, it came down to two things. And the two things were my health and my relationships, my connections. Now, if you'd asked 5 years ago, it could have been, oh, my job or the vacation I'm going to take or all these distractions. But we go right back to, am I alive? Am I above ground? And am I full of love? Do I have connections? Do I have love in my life? Not romantic love, but just sharing of connection. And so the world has kind of put us in situations that sometimes brings us to our knees. And then we start to ask the questions like, okay, there's got to be more. Like, I need help to survive, I need help to thrive. And we start asking the questions that force us inward. So you have the early adopters who were doing this just because it's good practice. And then you have the people who are down on their knees because they don't know where to go and they feel like they're at the end of their rope. But the number of people who have developed an inward practice has skyrocketed in the last 5 years. So, how do you know if you need it? Everybody needs it.
Hmm.
It reminds me of a story. Like in the old days, a student goes to the teacher and says, hey, teacher, how much should I be meditating every day? And the teacher says, oh, like probably an hour a day. But hey, if you're super busy and you're stressed out and you don't have time for this and you just can't fit it in, you probably need to be meditating 2 hours a day and adjust the timing for today's world. But there it is.
For you to start meditating and finding some version of that at 13, what a gift. You must have really had like you had a good assignment in this lifetime to find it early.
Yeah.
I found it later on in life, or it found me, whatever. And I remember experiencing just peace that I had never felt before. So much peace that I had
Yeah.
sort of tears streaming down my face. And then I've kind of been on this journey of learning what the heck is meditation and how do I use it. But I went through, and I think a lot of high achievers go through this. You almost go through this guilt period where you're like, but
Mm,
I'm doing nothing. I'm just sitting here doing nothing. And yeah, the point is being, not doing, right?
yeah. Let me put it in work context. Let's just go right there. So, every company worth its salt has figured out that if employees are healthy, that things go better. So, most companies that have more than a few hundred people have a gym of some sort, or they provide access to gym membership. And because we know now that when employees are physically healthy, they do better at work. Okay. Well, what we're talking about is mental exercise versus physical exercise. And we all know the statistics. A third of Americans in the last year suffering from symptoms of anxiety or depression, 85% are burned out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and for me, the most scary is 1 in 9 or 11% in the last 30 days seriously considered taking their own life.
Hmm.
Think about this from an employer perspective. Now, in your employees, how many of them do you need to run a 6-minute mile or to bench press twice their weight or to be able to hold a plank for 5 minutes? But how many of them do you need to be emotionally stable or to be mentally focused? We should be spending 100x on mental exercise than we are on physical exercise because our jobs are 100x mental versus physical. Of course, they're all related. I'm a proponent of physical health as well. But my point is simple. If your job requires you to be mentally sharp and mentally strong, in fact, most of us as high achievers, if you ask us what's the first thing we want to be proud of, like, oh, I'm smart, I'm blah, blah, blah. All right, well, these mental exercises help enhance that. It's not doing nothing. It's kind of getting you to do everything.
Yeah, it is taking your brain to the gym. And I still find there is a stigma around meditation. When I talk about it, and I sort of joke that you would think I got paid from some sort of like society of meditators because I am that big of an advocate and I carry my soapbox with me everywhere. But there are people who kind of look at me like, you want me to do what? And they think that it is sitting cross legged with your fingers in mudras and doing some version of Om
Yeah.
on a countryside. That is what people think of meditation, which is a myth. Can that be a version? Yes. Is that what Scott and I are really talking about? No. So when we're talking about mindfulness or meditation, Scott, what does it mean as at its simplest form? How do we help
Oh,
sort of
wow.
demystify some of the talk around meditation and mindfulness?
Sure. Well, it's all about quieting and going within. And everybody has a different flavor of that. And I think one of the stigmas is because a lot of us did come from spiritual traditions that are not perhaps in the mainstream. And so there's this idea, it's like, oh, that's a Buddhism thing or a Eastern thing that I don't know about, so I'm scared of it, so I'm not going to do it. Or it's not my spiritual master's thing, so I'm not going to do it. But everything we do in the workplace is totally secular. There's a version of it which is for all of us. And the way I think about that is it's kind of like the space program. In the 60s and 70s, we learned how to go to space. And from that effort, a lot of things happened. We learned about titanium and the benefits of manufacturing in aluminum and freeze drying and all kinds of technologies that have now found their way down to the common person. So it doesn't mean that if I have a titanium bicycle, as an example, that I'm going to be an astronaut, but I'm benefiting from those who went before me and learned something from it. So, in the same way, yes, a lot of these techniques did come from a tradition, but now we're finding a way to talk about it in a totally inclusive and secular way. So probably everyone has a practice that they've done which gets them calm. It could be quilting or fishing or closing your eyes and breathing or praying or saying the rosary or singing Hugh or Om or whatever it is. And here's the secret. You know what the most powerful type of practice you can do, the most powerful type of meditation, it's been scientifically proven. It's the one you'll actually do. Meaning, yeah, I have my own thing, but if you don't resonate with it and you don't do it, then it does no good for you. And so I always encourage people to fit the practice to their lives instead of fitting their lives to the practice. Find what works for you. You're probably already doing something like it.
I do think that it's more simple than people believe. And there's also this I have this conversation daily with clients or people who come and just ask questions about meditation, mindfulness. They often are like, well, I tried it and I wasn't very good at it. And I always sort of laugh and I'm like, welcome to the club. And I once had a
Yeah,
meditation teacher, actually, Emily Fletcher, who's the founder of Ziva. She said, listen, we don't meditate to be good meditators, we meditate to be better at life. And
yeah,
it's not about having no thoughts. I've never been able to completely shut my mind down from thinking. It's a matter of I now realize I'm the master of my thinking and my thoughts are not me.
that's right. At the end of a session one time, there was a guy who was new and we were chatting. I was asking, well, what was your experience like? How was it? He goes, it didn't work. I'm like, oh, and I was like, oh my goodness. Well, I guess, tell me about it. And he's like, yeah, I wasn't able to get my mind to go completely quiet. I said, oh, okay. Well, how do you feel? And he says, oh, I feel super relaxed. I haven't felt this relaxed in 15 years. Like I feel all calm and peaceful. And we all laughed. And we said, it worked. It worked.
That's the high achievers too, is they feel like they need a measurement of, but how
Yeah.
do I know I'm doing it right? How do I know I'm doing it well?
Right.
How do I become a successful blah,
Right.
blah, blah? And it's like, just give yourself the space.
And it can be really subtle. And so sometimes people will try it a few times and then they'll fall off the wagon, then they won't do it, and then they won't have a practice. But I think for me, what I notice now that I've been doing it for a very long time is I notice when I don't do it, right? If I'm having a day where I'm frankly not very proud of myself for how I'm acting or the how I'm emoting or whatever's going on, if I'm honest and I ask myself, okay, well, did you put in the work? Did you put in the work today and regularly in the last week? The answer is always no, always. And so I notice when I don't do it. And so it's one of these things where it helps to have a system. People ask me, like, okay, how do I keep a practice? Well, here's a few tips. One is I like ritual, make it a ritual. Actually, before that, it starts with intention, right? It starts with intention. James Clear from the book Atomic Habits, there's two parts of the book that are really highlight. The first one is about changing your identity. So if you want to have a practice, instead of saying, I'm not really good at meditation, you say, I am a meditator. Even if you've just started, you say, I am a meditator. You change your identity. And the second part is about systems. He says, our lives do not rise to the level of our goals, they fall to the level of our systems. Okay, so what's the system you're going to put in place? Okay, now for me, I like ritual. So for me, every morning I get up, I go outside to do it. Because if I lay in bed, I'm just going to fall asleep or I'm going to do it half heartedly and fall back asleep. But if I actually go outside, it creates this distance. It's like a ritual. If you want more than that, get an accountability buddy where every day you text back and forth or you email or you call or whatever it is just to say you've done it. And it's not a competition, it's a support group. And there's something really powerful about, like, okay, I got to get up because I got to tell Amy that I meditated today. Those are just a few things, but you have to create a system. Otherwise, it will not happen. Inertia of our lives is so powerful that you got to do something different.
For me personally, I think it's one of the best inside out practices that we can do. What can I do to tame or connect to the inside so that I can respond better? The world around me will not change for
Yeah,
me,
that's right.
but I can change how I choose to respond to this world. And you're big on that inside out, inside out. I've seen that multiple times in the book and what you post on LinkedIn, which by the way, follow Scott on LinkedIn. What are some other examples or suggestions that you have for people if they really want to tap into living a life more from the inside than just responding from the outside?
Hmm. It's all about our mental shifts. For those of you who like research, I like this one. So, Dr. Alison Brooks is a researcher, professor at Harvard. She's doing this study on karaoke. So, first of all, think about this. If I said, hey, you're about to go sing karaoke in front of strangers, how do you feel about that? All right, well, here's what she did. She divided the group into two. And for half of the group, the instructions were, hey, you're about to go sing in front of strangers. Somebody's going to ask you before you go on stage, how are you feeling? And I want you to just notice that you're feeling anxious. And you just tell them, I'm feeling a bit anxious. And then go sing your song. Okay. The other group, she said, all right, somebody's going to ask you, I just want you to notice that you're feeling excited. And you tell them, I'm feeling excited. And you go sing your song. This is the only difference between these two groups. Now, they went and sang their song. She's using Nintendo Super Karaoke to measure it. Like, in other words, she can get a score because there's a pitch and a pace. You get a score. But here's the deal, people who said, I'm feeling anxious, got accuracy scores in the 50s. People who said, I'm excited, got accuracy scores in the 80s. Our simple shift, right? We all feel the butterflies in our stomach. But the story we tell ourselves about those butterflies doesn't change the outside world, but it changes everything about our own mind. It changes everything about our own experience. And when our own experience changes, then the outside world starts to change too, because we have made the situation different. So when stuff happens, instead of getting caught into the victim mode or saying how bad it is, we get curious. It's like, oh, wow, I just lost my job or whatever hard thing it was. Is this what life wants for me? Like, if I got really curious about this and truly saw it as a gift, if it were a gift, how would I respond to it? If it were a gift. And I know that the listeners have a wide spectrum of their own spirituality, but for people who believe in a higher power, and if there's an order to that higher power, if every single thing in the world was a gift from your spiritual teacher or the divine, how would you respond? Like if you could talk to God or your spiritual teacher and they said, oh yeah, this crappy thing we gave to you, this is just for you. Like we planned this just for you. How would you respond? And even if you don't believe that's how the world works, it's still a really powerful mental shift to say, okay, I'm the master of my own life. I'm going to respond as if this were a gift to me. And when I act like that, I am way more powerful. And then I do change the world from the inside out.
I think everybody can think of examples of that. If you're listening right now and you're sort of like, I don't know, Scott, I don't know if I believe that or not.
Yeah,
I just want to challenge you to look at the history of your life. Chances are there was something that happened that you didn't want to have happened. You would have not chosen that for yourself,
that's
but in disguise, it was a gift because it led you to the next relationship, the next job, the
right.
next growth or impact of learning how powerful you are. There is a ripple effect. And I really appreciate this take. It's not always easy to do when you're in it.
No,
My friends, we talk about sitting in the shit. Sometimes you just have to
yep,
sit in it and get the lesson,
yep.
but there is always a lesson on the other side.
I call this black belt level gratitude. Because it's easy to look back in high school for me now that's been a long time and see that the things that happened, like there was good that came out of it. Of course, I didn't want to go through being bullied. Of course, I didn't want to go through blah, blah, blah. But over time, you got to see, like, oh, that shaped me. It shaped me in a way that I wouldn't have traded it. Actually, if you ask most people, is there anything you would have traded out of your life? Most people, outside of trauma, most people are like, no, I went through that hard stuff, but I am who I am because of those hard things. Now, the black belt level gratitude for life is to be able to do it in the moment when it's hard right now. And sometimes it takes a long time for the lesson to come. You're like, okay, I get it. This is bad. What's the lesson? And like, I don't know. I don't know. And so there's this letting go that says, I'm going to roll with it. Whatever's happening, I'm going to do the best I can. Because what good does it do me to be a victim here? I want to be a player. I want to be a co creator with life, not just a leaf on the water. So this is not, I don't think it's ever easy, but with practice, it's powerful.
What a great statement. It's not easy, but it's powerful. Okay, question for you. I don't think I've ever asked a guest this question before, but if somebody were to hand you a bucket of money and say, hey, Scott, here's $10 million, but
Wow.
you can never meditate and you have to abandon your rituals or your practices, what would you say to that person?
Wow. Well, I would first try to like look through the technicalities of the contract to see if there's some other way I could do my practice without.
The loophole. I love it.
I'm just thinking as a human, right? This is my human mind going, what's the loop? Like if I just close my eyes, you don't know that I'm not meditating. So, but if the contract, if it was solid, unbreakable, essentially you're asking me, would I trade my practice for $10 million?
Mhm.
No, no, I wouldn't. I would not. For several reasons. One is I realize the power of my own practice on my happiness, right? And I've spent a lot of years chasing happiness. We all chase happiness. I was an achiever because I thought being an achiever would get me happiness. This job, this title, this amount of money would give me happiness. But I've lived long enough now to know that happiness is an inside job. You can't buy it. There's a certain level, and science will also show us there's a certain level at which, yeah, more money does give you more happiness. But then it's not that high of an amount in America. And everything after that, more money does not equal more happiness. And my practice has become integral to who I am. And now I know that probably even if I had less than that amount of money, that I would still be happy.
It's so clear that you practice what you preach. So I just want to honor that and say thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And I've learned there's some really great just talk tracks that you bring to the table. And I hope for everybody who's listening that you can lean in and hear from Scott that really taking responsibility for how you show up, how you see the world, all of your problems you think you have begin at the root of your own perception, and leaning into a practice that helps you create or cultivate peace within is priceless. It is not that next dollar that you're chasing or the role that you might think you need for happiness. It is all within. Scott, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom. Can you just share with our listeners, how do they connect with you? How do they find you?
Sure, you can go to scottshute.com or follow me on LinkedIn. And the types of things I'm doing in the world, if you're interested, I come to companies and talk and help them become more conscious. I'm building a product for managers and teams. So if you're a manager or a leader at work and want to bring consciousness or compassion to your workplace, reach out to me. I'm at scott@scottshute.com. I love to hear from people.
Before we wrap this episode, here are my 3 takeaways from Scott and how we can be a better leader. Number 1, what does your best self at work look like? Heck, what does your best self look like? If you were to grab a piece of paper and just journal out, what does my highest, best self look like? How do I show up for myself and others? And how can you ensure that you're incorporating that into every single day? I think our power comes from our intentionality. And the next question to ask ourselves is, how can I allow my team to do the same for them? How do they bring their best selves to work? Are we giving them the space to do so? And number 2, remember it's important that you find a practice, specifically a mindfulness practice, that fits best into your life, and you're not trying to fit your life into that practice. I believe there is a recipe for feeling good. And we all have it, and it looks a little bit different for all of us. And we don't have to copy what it looks like for someone else. No harm in giving it a whirl. But if you create your recipe for a great day, you always have that to go back to when things feel like they come off the rails. Whether that's starting your day with breath work or quietness or prayer or workout or a combination of those things, make sure that it's fitting into your life. And lastly, are you working to change the world from the inside out? Being the master of your own life, being conscious about shifting your mindset. Listen, all problems begin at the root of perception. And truly, I believe, and Scott and I are very aligned in this, is that a happy, successful life begins inward. Challenge yourself to show up with that each day. When you feel frustrated or out of alignment, instead of pointing the finger outside of you, go within and ask yourself how you can show up a little bit differently. Thanks for listening to Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. If you have questions for me or our guest, or you just geek out on this consciousness and mindfulness stuff, I invite you to come join us over on the Conscious Habit Facebook group and keep that conversation going. If you're curious about how to become more conscious or mindful as a leader, or you're interested in bringing these topics to your team, come visit us at theconscioushabit.com. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.